how well they cared for the lands and the waters that we're now living on so lavishly. And I want to thank them for clinging to their worldview, which I believe is what we desperately need at this very, very critical moment in time. It's an honor to have an opportunity to share a few ideas with you. I'm not going to talk about the issues of the Wet'suwet'en. I hope someone is going to talk about that in detail. I'd like to provide a bit of context from the standpoint of a non-Indigenous person. Ever since Stephen Harper became Prime Minister, I've had to open my remarks by saying, I'm not here speaking on behalf of any organization, any corporation or political party. I'm speaking to you this evening as an elder. And as an elder, you know, and I see there are a lot of them in the audience, we're in a great position because we no longer have to kiss anybody's behind in order to get a job or a promotion. We can speak the truth now from our hearts. I speak primarily these days as a grandfather because I know that throughout time, every parent, every grandparent has hoped to leave their offspring in a better world with greater opportunities than they have. And now we know with absolute certainty that that is no longer possible, and that every passing year leads to a diminished world to pass on to coming generations. It's not just climate change that is the issue, although it is the greatest threat, I believe, to our immediate survival, but it's a host of other problems created by human activity, the most urgent of which I believe was reported on Monday with the United Nations, a study done on the state of biodiversity on the planet. And I was part of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment a few years ago, which came to the same conclusion, that human development, human activity, human demands are creating a real crisis in the loss of species and ecosystems around the planet. But finally, I want to say I speak as a scientist who is aware of what my colleagues in science are saying and horrified at how the pronouncements being made by scientists have so little impact in the world today. We've called ourselves Homo sapiens. We're the ape that is smart. We're smart. Okay. We are smart. But what the hell got us into this mess then, if we're so smart? How on earth did we get here? Now I know that every culture, every people have their origin stories. Their origin stories are filled with wisdom, with meaning, and deeply embedded in place. And what science is doing today is providing an addition to the origin story that extends back beyond human memory. I'm a geneticist, and as a geneticist I've been astounded at the way scientists have found they can use DNA to tease out information about ourselves. And we can use DNA now to actually follow the movement of humankind across the planet over time. And all the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. That was our birthplace. I'm still waiting for the Ku Klux Klan to invite me to give them a lecture so I can tell them we're all Africans, for God's sake. What's your problem? That's where we were born. And when you think back of what Africa was like when our species appeared, the plains must have been filled with animals in abundance and diversity beyond anything we could imagine today or we could see today. And here and there you'd have to look hard to see those two-legged, furless apes. And that was us. And you got to admit, looking at it in that context, we weren't very impressive. I mean, there weren't very many of us. We weren't big, we weren't fast, we weren't strong, we didn't have extra sensory abilities. How the hell did we get to where we are? I'm sure that no other species, when we pass by, would, shh, don't piss them off. They're going to take over the planet. I mean, we were not an impressive animal because our secret, our advantage was hidden. It was a 1.5 kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. The human brain was the secret of our enormous success. It conferred a massive memory. It conferred curiosity. It conferred creativity, observational abilities. And that brain more than compensated for our lack of physical or sensory ability, and it invented a concept no other species had, called the future. We understood that what we do today has consequences, and we could use what we learned over time to recognize where dangers lay and where there were opportunities. You know, it could be something simple. You're walking down a path, you come to a branch in the path, and you remember, oh yeah, I went that way to the right, and I ran into a saber-toothed tiger, but when I went off to the left, I found something good to smoke. I mean, eat. So I'm going left. That's what we did. We looked ahead at the consequences of what we were doing in the present, and we chose a path that gave us a greater chance of survival. I believe foresight was the great advantage the human brain conferred on us. And that brain then allowed us to spread out of our home, our birthplace, the Great Plains of Africa. And we don't know why we began to spread. Probably we began to run out of resources or began to look for more opportunities. I like to think it was teenagers looking for action on the other side of the pond. You know, we bred with Neanderthals, and maybe the stories came, you know, some good-looking Neanderthal chicks over there, and let's go. But whatever the reasons, we moved. We began to move across the planet, and where we came, we were an invasive species. We didn't know how the heck things were. Wow, look at all those flightless birds, and they're yummy to eat. And we began to slaughter them. You can follow a path of extinction as humans moved across the planet. And then there must have come times when people went, well, what happened to all those birds, or those giant sloths? Those plants aren't as available as they were. And so you had a choice. You could say, well, we've got to move on looking for more, or we've got to stay here and we've got to live in a different way. And I believe that that's the root of indigenousness, that people who said, we're staying. We're going to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, from the successes of our ancestors. Those are hard-won life lessons that we've got to remember and honor, because they're going to be the basis of how we survive in this area. And now around the world, indigenous people possess knowledge of living in place that is thousands of years old and will never be duplicated by science. And that's why the loss of indigenous culture and language is such a crisis and a catastrophe for all of humankind, because that knowledge was hard won to keep people alive and to flourish. So we come to the day today when the success of our species is that we are now the most numerous mammal on the planet. There are more of us than any species of mouse or rabbit or rat. And of course we are like no other mammalian species. We are armed with an enormous amount of technology and a tremendous demand for stuff. But we have as well amplified our ability to look ahead. We have scientists. We have supercomputers. And for over 50 years, the leading scientists have been telling us that we're headed down a very dangerous path, that there are opportunities if we change direction and exploit the new opportunities. And now, for some reason, we are turning our backs on what was the survival strategy of our species. Let me show you what's happened in our time. I'm sorry, I've been told I don't have much time, so I'm trying to speed it up here. I just want to read to you this remarkable document that was released in 1992 in anticipation of the Earth Summit, which was going to happen in Rio de Janeiro. And it's called World Scientists Warning to Humanity. It's signed by more than 1,500 scientists from 71 countries in the world, and it includes more than half of all Nobel Prize winners alive at that time. So this is a serious document. What does it say? It begins by saying, Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment and on critical resources. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. So there is a profound statement that is in the tradition of our species, looking ahead and seeing where the dangers lie. And as they describe the dangers, the environment, the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forests, species extinction, and overpopulation, then the words become even more grim. No more than one or a few decades remain. This is 1992. Before the chance to avert the threats we now confront will be lost, and the prospects for humanity immeasurably diminished. A great change in our stewardship of the earth and life on it is required if vast human misery is to be avoided, and our global home on this planet is not to be irretrievably mutilated. And then they describe the 5 things that are urgent and must be done immediately. This is an amazing document. In 2017, 25 years after this document was released, another document was released called World Scientist Warning to Humanity #2. And this one was signed by more than 16,000 scientists. And what they said is that other than the ozone layer, all of the problems that were described in here have gotten worse, and there are new ones that weren't anticipated, new problems that weren't anticipated in this document. What the heck is going on? We are turning our backs on the very strategy that got us here in the first place. Looking ahead and taking action to avoid danger and exploit opportunity. And I believe the problem is that we have shifted in the way that we see our relationship with the earth. For 95% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We carried everything on our backs, following plants and animals through the seasons. When you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer, you know you are deeply embedded in and utterly dependent on nature. 10,000 years ago began the agricultural revolution that fundamentally shifted the way that we live as human beings. Now we could build permanent structures called houses or homes. Now we could begin to build houses together and build little communities. And ultimately, civilization as we know it was made possible by the agricultural revolution. And when you're a farmer, even in 1900, the vast majority of people were involved in farming. When you're a farmer, you know weather and climate are absolutely critical to the way that you live. You know the amount of snow in the winter is related to how much moisture is in the soil in the summer. You know insects are critical for pollinating flowering plants. You understand that we are deeply embedded in the natural world. But something began to happen with the Industrial Revolution. We began to invent technology, machines that could now do things humans could never do in the past. And we began to shift in the way that we lived, off of rural agrarian communities into big cities. And we created a thing called the global economy that we now bow down before, that has become more important than anything else. So when Mr. Harper was our Prime Minister, and every time he was asked about climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, he always dismissed it as, that's crazy economics. Trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will destroy the economy. And so he raised the economy above the very atmosphere that gives us air to breathe, that gives us weather, climate, and the seasons. And I remember back a few years ago when Canada was considering signing, this is 1980s, signing a free trade agreement with the United States. And John Crispo, an economist from the University of Toronto who was on the board of the CBC, was cited saying over and over, if we don't sign free trade with the Americans, Canada will be an economic basket case. That kind of never made sense to me. And I asked an eminent economist named Kenneth Boulding in the United States, I said, you know, this is what's going on in Canada. And he said, if you want to figure out how wealthy your country is, imagine you wake up tomorrow and the entire world has disappeared except your country and 200 miles of ocean around it. Would you starve? Not as long as Canada is the breadbasket of the world. Would you lack resources like trees or minerals or energy? Would you lack people that are able to make whatever you need? By any criterion you want to apply, Canada is one of the richest, most prosperous nations on the planet. But the global economy made us poor, or critically about to become poor. This is crazy. The economy is a human construct. You know, 400 years ago, people used to get really scared if they thought dragons were going to come down and blow fire on them. I mean, we'd give them jewels, and we'd do all kinds of things to keep them from being mad at us. Well, we know today their dragons were a figment of our imagination. And yet what do? We replace it with another figment of our imagination, the global economy. And look at the papers, you know. Oh, the economy's not looking healthy, and we start shaking. Oh my God, what do we do? What do we sacrifice in order to keep that economy going? It's a figment of our creation, for God's sake. It's not a part of nature. And this, I think, is a fundamental challenge we face. For 99% of human existence, we lived in an ecocentric world. A world that we saw we were embedded in a web of interconnections with the rest of nature, with the rest of life, which indigenous people call our relatives, the animals and plants who make our lives possible. The ecocentric worldview saw us as one part and grateful to this bigger system. But we have shifted to an anthropocentric notion. Where the action is, everything revolves around us. So we've created religions. Sorry, folks, but religions are a human construct. God may be talking to you, but it's a human construct. We've created capitalism. We've drawn borders around property in cities and provinces and countries. And boy, we take those things really seriously. We'll go to war, we'll kill people protecting those borders. Do you think nature gives a hoot about human borders? You know, I tell Albertans, I don't care whether you dig up every bit of the tar sands oil, burn it, do whatever you want with those tailings ponds, as long as everything you do stays in Alberta.
Yeah! Yeah!
That isn't the world we live in. And so long as we throw out these human constructs like borders, like the economy, like our legal system, we are in deep trouble. Because we live in a much greater world, and there is no room in that world for the sacred, for the things that are priceless. So let me end, I'm keeping it parsimonious, let me end on one story. You know, in the 1990s, China, Hong Kong was about to revert to China. And I have lived in the same house now in Kitsilano for 45 years. And we got a letter in the mail from a real estate agent saying, offshore money is pouring into Vancouver. It's a perfect time for you to sell and buy up. I had never heard the term buying up before, and I only learned later that you buy a little starter home and then you work your way up to bigger and bigger McMansions or something. And this really upset me because someone unsolicited had come to me and said, we want you to sell your property. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to put this on the market, what would I put down as the things that have made this my home? And the first thing I put down is when I married Tara, I fell in love with her mother and dad, and I invited them to come and live with us when he retired, which he did. And I never dreamt he would live as long as he did. 35 years later, both Harry and Freddie, but they died at home, surrounded by family, and my children, who grew up in that property all their lives, had grandma and granddad there all their lives. And I put that down. was an avid gardener, and he planted asparagus and raspberries because he knew they were my favorites. And I came back from a month's trip through the United States, and the first person that met me was my father-in-law. Said, "David, this is the first set of asparagus that came off, and I saved it for you. It belongs to you." And I put that down as something that gave value to that house. I built a tree house and a dogwood tree for my children and have given them countless hours of pleasure, and I put that down. My kids have dragged in, believe it or not, you get roadkill even in Kitsilano, and they dragged in dead squirrels and crows and rats, and they have a little animal cemetery under the dogwood tree, and I put that down. My dad was a cabinet maker, and when Tara and I were married, he built a kitchen cabinet for our apartment. When I bought this house, I ripped the cabinet out and put it in the house. It looks like hell, it doesn't belong there, but every time I open that door, the cabinet door, my dad is there, and I put that down. My best friend came out from Toronto to spend a week with me, and he helped me build a fence along the water side, and he carved a handle for the gate. And every time I use that gate, I think of my best friend, and I put that down. And along the water, there is a clematis plant, and when my mother died, I put her ashes on that clematis, and every year when it blooms, I know my mother is there. And those are the things that make my property my home. And those are the things that to me are priceless. But when I put it on the market, they are worthless. And that's the problem with this whole economic system we bow down before. The things that matter most to us have no value in that system. And then I think of indigenous people who have lived in place for thousands of years, for whom the rivers, the mountains, the forest are sacred. How do you put a price on that? And maybe if we had those kinds of values, we would look at the world and live in it in a radically different way. Thank you very much for listening.